show where we are on a journey to learn more about writing together with you, the audience. So thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and with me is the fantabulous Kalene Williams. This episode's book spotlight is Farthest Reach, an anthology written by our very own Keystroke Mediums and edited by moi. Tonight we're talking about plotting a novel series. Our guest has been privileged to work with New York Times bestselling authors, edit hundreds of books, and teach thousands of writers the emotional impact of fiction. Yet he still considers himself a student of story. His passion for the study of story drives him forward, and he shares his discoveries in easy-to-understand lessons, working one-on-one with authors of all levels. He is the co-host of the Book Editor Show, creator of multiple creative writing courses, author of 5 books, believer of dreams, and once tore its cooler from the mouth of a bear. Clark Chamberlain, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Epic
Yay.
Intro.
Woo, yeah, that's I love that intro. That was great. I didn't write it.
I may have had a hand in it. But, you know.
Which is why you're perfect to be on the show, because you are magic with the words.
Well, thank you very much. It's actually a real pleasure to be back here again. I love the energy you two have and what you're doing with this show, and it's awesome.
Thank you.
And speaking of awesome, today this show has a huge milestone because fans of the show submitted stories to our space opera anthology, our first and maybe our only space opera anthology, and today it's live. So we're very proud of you guys and proud of the show and proud of our audience, and yay, everyone. Tonight we're talking about a topic that a lot of authors are excited to speak more about, and that's how to plot a series. We've learned that writing one book is great, but to make it on Amazon and to get those readers and to get those eyeballs on your books, a lot of authors feel like you have to write a whole series. But how do you do that? How do you plot not just one book, but actually a whole series and get that plot to be fun and exciting and draw the readers through from book 1 to 3 to 5 or whatever it is? So Clark, you've worked with a lot of authors, you've worked on a lot of series, and we knew that you'd be the perfect guy to kind of bring on the show to talk about this topic. So yeah, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. Like it is such a big topic. And like if you go on Amazon or anywhere to look for books on writing, like finding a book on writing a series really isn't out there. And it is different. It's not just going and writing one book and writing another book and writing another book. If you want to be able to make sure you have that maximum engagement. So there's some stuff, and there's great questions, and I'm excited to get into these. And
yeah, our mediums submitted so many questions. I only had to write one, and the rest are all written by our fans.
They went absolutely bonkers. Starting with Rick Partlow. He asks, thoughts on outlining all the books in the series first before starting to write. Wait, what? Hang on. Back that up. Thoughts on outlining all the books in the series first before starting to write the first book. There we go. That makes more sense.
Well, and I really want to preface this, and this is my big warning label, something like that. The only wrong way to write is not writing. And so everything that I'm going to talk about today and things, again, this is a personal experience or experience that I've had with other writers. And it may not be because you've got to find the method that's going to work best for you. And so just keep that in mind. And yeah, that's my warning. So yeah, with Rick's question, I would say that you have to find, of course, what works for you. But if the series is going to have any kind of dynamic characters, and also you're planning on ending it, with like a trilogy or 5 books or 7 books, you should at the minimum know what the major parts of each act in each book are going to be and having that outline. So you have just at least that minimum. And personally, I would say you outline all of them so that you know where you're going, and then you can move things around, because you'll notice, as you outline an entire series, that you're like, okay, this character or this scene would actually fit better in the next book. And those kinds of things, are stuff if you're writing one book at a time, you might write yourself into a corner.
And then why Why would an author want to write a series and not just write one book that they get excited about and then write another book they get excited about? What's the advantage of a series?
Well, of course, the advantage of a series is it pulls in readers and it keeps them coming back for more. A series is an excellent way to have building a world that someone can get totally immersed in, and that they want to explore the next part of the world and the next part of the world and the next part, and they're just thrilled to come back to that time and time again. So doing a single book, can be great. And if that's what you want to do, I'm not saying don't do that. But if you were going to do the series, there's definitely better ways to do it. Because my own personal experience, when the first book that I started was going to be, it's going to be a series, and I wrote the book one and put it out. It's good. And I have worked 5 years, 6 years or something like that on book two, because I just keep not knowing where to go with it. And I'm like, maybe I should just pull the first one and rewrite it, and then I can work better, because it just not having that idea. And I know I'm going to answer this actually a little bit later too with another question, but not having that idea of where you're going can really hold you up. And more specifically to that, if you're an indie author, it's a really good way to help make the money, right? Having that series, by the time you're getting book 4, that's when you're really having momentum and moving readers from one book to the next book to the next book, and really starting to see sales pick up.
Yeah, I know, because they get invested in that world. They get invested in those characters. They become part of it. And the best way to continue, generating that revenue certainly is taking that series as long as the story will allow.
Right.
That kind of starts to answer Anna Johnson's question. Should you write a few books and stockpile them before releasing, or write and publish one at a time?
So, okay, so let's say that you have outlined all the books. So let's use this as a, continuation from the first one. If you've outlined all the books, yeah, you can release them one at a time because you know where you're going with it. Right now, and this could change, right? I mean, the algorithms and things like that, if you're on Amazon, constantly changing. But right now, it would serve you better if you held off and stockpiled them before releasing them, so that you could get the most benefit from their algorithms. But as long as you actually know where your series is going, then releasing them one at a time isn't going to be a terrible thing. But think about this, like if you're writing them along and you come to book 3 and all of a sudden you're like, this would have so much more impact if this other character had done this, and it's a significant change, and you haven't released the books, guess what? Then you can go back and make that significant change.
Which actually is another question that I had seen previously from Bill Frisbee, asking about, what if you have cool ideas and need to set breadcrumbs for previous books if you've already released them? And I'm actually going to cram in another question that he had because it kind of fits in with this. What do you do if you've already released it and you need to add that something in for book 4 or 5, and you already have 1 and 2 out, but it needs to go in 1 or 2?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you may have missed the boat on 1 or 2, like if it absolutely had to have been there and you published it, I mean, you, depending on how many readers you have, you could go back and add it in. But if you've already published it, you might have missed that and need to change it. And that's one of the things with his question that I would say, like, let me grab my notes here because it's a little bit further down.
Sorry, I know I totally.
No, that's okay.
Skyrocketed over everything.
But one of the things that you could do is look for less significant things in the story in book 1 or 2 to, so for instance, that you might have a character or a phrase that someone said or an artifact or something like that really wasn't that significant in book 1 or 2. And then you could add significance to that in book 3, that you're actually pulling through, and then it makes it look more like you were really thinking smart and ahead.
He was just a slow growing character.
Right, exactly. Yeah, especially side characters, who weren't really doing much beforehand, can be an excellent way to do that. But again, like if it's already out, like you have to make the decision. Do I pull the books and do I change everything so that it's better for long term, or do I just keep going with where I'm at? And that's a real personal question. I know Brian Cohen pulled all of his superhero books at one point and reworked them. to make them better and put them back out. It's a real difficult decision, actually, right? I mean, us as editors, like, going back in and re-editing a book that's already been published, like, that's a big commitment to come back through and change things. But if it makes a story better, again, legacy assets, legacy asset, legacy asset. These books will live past your lifetime. So if it makes a book better and makes it sell better, why not do it?
If you have the time, the gumption,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, there we go.
And probably some pizza.
Well, pizza and alcohol, the important things, coffee.
Well, one of the cool things about plotting out the whole series is that you might come up with these breadcrumbs before you even get to the stage of writing any of the books, if you're thinking through the plot ahead of time. Now, all the pantsers are squirming, and pantsers got their methods, and they write brilliant stuff through their pantsing. More power to you. But I'm one of those that really has to think through my whole plot, think through my scenes before I get going, and then still be open when I'm in the middle of writing to changing it all up, if that's where the muse is going to go. But let's get back to your method of plotting. So how do you plot a series?
Okay, so this is how I do it, and this is my method, and what I teach, and it works really well for me. And I think that if you tried it out, it could work really well for you too. So the first thing you have to decide, is your series static or dynamic? Okay, and a static series means think Bond, James Bond, think that type of book where you come in and each book really doesn't change. The character's not changing from book to book. It's just the setting and stories that's changing. So that's a static series, which means that you could have as many of them as you want, doing whatever you want with them. Where a dynamic series, think Harry Potter, where the character grows. I mean, he literally grows up, through the series, means that you're going to have a lot of changes and things are going to be developing. So you make that decision. Which is it going to be? If it's a static, then what you need to do is start to develop what I would say is a formula, same but different type of formula, which means that every time the reader comes into that static series, it's going to feel the same, but of course there's going to be some different things. So for instance, if you were taking James Bond, what is the formula for James Bond? It starts off, Bond is on a mission. Okay, that mission ends, Bond goes to headquarters, gets new mission and gadgets. Bond on new mission being Bond, right? Car chases, beautiful women, crazy villains, spycraft, etc. Bond discovers a twist. Bond is put into peril, and then Bond meets the bad guy. That is the same James Bond story in every single one of them. And so you're just plugging that in, like that's how you're developing that static series. And then you use that same method for each of the books. And if you're doing a static series, understand you don't have to then plan out 10 books ahead. Like you could just be doing one book at a time and kicking them out. And it still is a series.
Yeah.
So, but if it's dynamic, then you really need to determine the length. Is it a trilogy? Is it 5 books, 7 books, 9 books? Is it more than that? And understand that at some point, your readers will lose some interest in that super long series, right? Because it's just like any kind of thing that goes on for too long, right? Too much of a good thing. It can be really good up front, right? But eventually you kind of get burned out on it. So you need to know where it is that you're going and then decide how it's going to end. And you're like, well, I haven't even made characters or the world or anything. Like just, come up with just a basic idea of how the ending comes in. And don't be afraid to be completely generic. You don't have to go through and develop every character or everything. Just use terms like protagonist. This is a foil. This is the antagonist. Here's my plot point. Act 1. Like just use these types of generic terms for stuff while you're trying to put these things together. And concentrate on the major events of each book, which is just basically the 3 acts. Like what's going to happen that moves your character from Act 1 into Act 2, Act 2 to Act 3, and what's the climax of each book. And then you can at least have that, right? If you have that much, then you're so far ahead of the game because at least you know where you're going and where it's going to end. Okay. From that though, to make it even bigger, then start brainstorming scenes that you'd like to see in the book. Okay, stuff that you're excited about. And this is something that I did with my son. We plotted 15 books this summer, and for a project that's coming up.
Make
And
me
so
feel like a slacker, man.
and this is the first time I'd ever tried this before, because I was, we were sitting around the table in our writer's room and like just kind of talking back and forth, developing some story ideas and world ideas. And then I was like, hey, what kind of fun stuff do you want to see in this book? And that triggered just a whole bunch of scenes. Like they had no connection or where they're going to go, and they might have gone in a different book, but we just wrote down a bunch of stuff that we thought would be fun for that series. And that's a great way to just develop different types of scenes. Again, that might not even be in book 1, they might be in book 3, however you want to put it. And then, of course, use my method, the 10 essential scenes and the 3-act structure, to fill in those major scenes for each book. And then you can go back and create the minor scenes, and then you make adjustments. And that's it. Like, I mean, and all of a sudden, we did a weekend and we got 3 books done in the trilogy. Like, it can be that simple. But using more basic generic things is a really easy way to plot fast.
So I've got 2 questions from that. One is, what are those 10 essential scenes? And the other is, what do you mean? Could you explain what you mean by generic characters, generic scenes?
Oh, sure. So let's do the generic stuff first.
Before you answer.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I was really quickly looking up. I remember you going into this on episode 9. So if y'all want to hear super duper deep on how do I structure a novel, you can get even more information on it in episode 9. All right, sorry, continue.
No, that's right. So basically, when I talk about generic, okay, because one thing that I run into, someone's trying to plot, and they might feel like they have to know all the answers, right? They need to know what their character's name is, what their background is, who are they? Look, we've got archetype characters. Like, you just grab the archetype character. They are the Matrix, they're the Neo type character, right? Like, that is all you have to use. That's, because that encapsulates everything that character is. You could call them Bond. You could just call them the protagonist. And all you're doing that way is that here's a scene where the protagonist fights the antagonist, and it leads to this. So I believe when we were doing that one, because I've added a 4th P to my 3 Ps, so now there's more P. All right, and that is just the basics of story, right? You have a person, you have a protagonist in a place that has a problem, and then everything has to have a payoff. So that's a 4th one that I've tossed in there.
I like it a lot.
Yes, because that way, like, that's the scene. Like, so this happens, this is where they're at, and this is the results. And that basic scene is all you need to move forward to the next scene and to the next scene. Because if you know that, let's use Potter, for example, if you know that the very end of Potter, he's going to have to fight Quirrell, like, you can put the protagonist fights the antagonist to save the artifact in the castle. Like, that's as simple as it is. And then what happens because of that, and then he wins and saves the day. Like, that's what I mean by generic. Just keep things simple. You don't have to get super complex at the beginning, because, again, like, think of this as a large blueprint. And then you can go in and start really developing it as you move forward. But if you have that major structure done for each of the books, then you should be able to take a look at it and say, is this going to work? Is there a better way to do this? Is this a story that I want to tell? And if that's correct, then you're not wasting time. Because if you're spending a whole bunch of time developing all this stuff, and then you get to the point you're like, I don't even care about this story anymore. Like, that's I'm just trying to help you be efficient with your time.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I mean, one of the things that I always find myself doing in the back of my mind, especially when I'm editing for someone, is, what does this scene do for the story? Mm-hmm. What is this scene doing for the character? If it's not doing one thing or the other, is it entirely necessary?
Right. Because if it's not necessary, if it's not advancing your A story or B story, or what you would call the plot or the subplot, why is it there? What is it really doing to help you out?
We had a question from chat. Luke asked, so an archetype would be like the underdog or the expert or something like that?
Yes, exactly. So that's exactly the type of archetypes we're talking about. There's a really good book, I think it's called The 20 Archetypes. It's from Writer's Digest, and it breaks them down as the gods and goddesses from Greek mythology, and shows you, like, this is what this type of person is, this is what this type of person does. If you don't want to go pick up a book, then just take a look at other characters, from your favorite stories. Like, if you want to do a character like James Bond, then just call them James Bond. Like, you know what you're talking about, and you can just move forward. You don't have to spend a lot of time. Now, eventually, yes, you do need to spend time developing that, but I'm just talking about just getting these basics done and out.
So step one would be to come up with the big idea of each book in your series. Maybe it's just a sentence or two, and then to expand that idea a little bit more to come up with the basic problem, the climactic moment you're leading towards, the resolution, and do that for each of the book in your series. And then take a closer look at each of these books and also work in the 10 essential scenes. What were those 10 essential scenes?
Okay, so we're 10 essential scenes. Opening action, okay, that's where the story opens. The deep protagonist introduction, what your protagonist is, who they are, where the protagonist enters the plot, right? Where do they choose to move from Act 1 into Act 2? Moving into Act 2, you've got the deeper understanding of your characters and world. So this is the fun and games section. Protagonist initial success. This is something that gets left out sometimes, but the reader needs to know that the protagonist has some ability to win, even if they do just something small. Why does the protagonist care at all about this plot? Like, why are they committed to keep doing this? You have to have that total failure moment, which coincidentally is also your plot point between Act 1 and Act 2, or Act 2 and Act 3. Protagonist strengthening, how do they overcome their failure, climax, and then the resolution. So those are the 10 essential scenes, and some of them do fit in with your main 3-act structure, but make sure that you have all the elements that are in there. And so again, you can find those at the Book Editor Show. I guess they're actually on authorhustle.com, the front page right now, or something like that, of the Book Editor Show. And then also on episode 9, right? That's what you said?
Episode 9.
Yeah. And we go into a lot more detail on what those were. Because we got a lot here to talk about too. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so what happens in Act 1? Why, what are they doing in Act 1? Okay. So think about it this way. Let's use Star Wars. His aunt and uncle die, and he goes to save the princess. That's Act 1. Act 2, they escape, but after the death of Obi-Wan from the Death Star. That's the end of there. And then, of course, the third thing is they blow up the Death Star. Bing, bang, boom. That's your book. That's book 1. And then what is book 2? And so that's what I'm talking about. Just get those major elements down. If you can see those major elements of your story, you can work in the details and how they got there in between all those things. But if you don't understand those major details or those major points, then you need to do some more brainstorming. Come up with ideas. Like, what do you want to see? What would be the coolest thing in this world that you're wanting to develop? Because you're going to spend a lot of time here. And what would make a reader really excited?
Yeah, I drive Frisbee crazy with that, because I'm always like, hey, here's a cool idea. I don't know what book it's going in, but blah, 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 blah. And he's like, you need to put that down somewhere because we're losing it in the chat. Anyway, sorry.
So if you plot all those things out ahead of time before you get to writing, then you won't have to later on maybe unpublish a book that you've already published because you later thought of something cool.
Right.
You kind of plot it all out ahead of time and figure it out before.
Yeah.
Hopefully
so. And then if you've gone and then developed the major or the minor parts in all this, you've gotten to that point where you actually have scene by scene breakdown of your entire book. If you are of the opinion that you want to publish them as you write them, then you should be safe. Like, if you know where you're going, you should be safe. But one of the things that can happen, though, is you start writing and then your characters do something different, right? They start taking control of something and they go a different direction. And then that might screw up the rest of your plot. So that's the whole thing about maybe you save it until everything's done, because maybe something better comes along as you're in the writing phase.
And another way, especially if you maybe are like, yeah, I want to do that 6, 9, 12 book series, if you can break them down into 3 book chunks, where it's like a larger arc for 3, and then in all of them is one big arc. Might be a way to help alleviate, that frustration when you get to book 4 or 5 and you're like, oh, I really needed this in book 3. And also what you're saying, the characters suddenly doing things you don't want them to, because at least that way you've only gone 3 books out, not 9, and have to redo everything.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So, for instance, the 15 books that I was talking about just a little bit that I outlined with my son, they all are leading into different stories. And so at the end of each trilogy, there was what's the lead in, like what's that end moment. So think about the end credit scene. Like if you're talking about a movie, you wait till the very end and there's some little spoiler trailer thing to move forward. And so like that's what we did. We figured those out to then lead into the next books. Let me.
We had a comment from chat says, "Yep, Kalene, remember what we did with that quick online bit with Looney Tunes Space Marines? Basic storyline commentary, Act 1 to open the story."
Yep, that's probably Frisbee. I think maybe.
How do I? Sorry, how do I put this in the chat? It's in a private chat, I guess. But anyway, there's those. The things. Real quick. Anyway, yeah. It didn't put in the dots.
Well, Kalene is figuring that out. In a little bit, we're going to get into more specific questions about plotting with series, questions brought up by real life authors who want to know Clark's opinion. But first, we're going to hear about the book of the week.
All right.
Kalene.
I will copy and paste Clark's thingy into the chat in uno momento, but it's 500 characters long and I only have a 200 character limit. So I will do that in a second. Okay, let me scroll. Stop it, computer. Okay, here we go. All right, this episode's Book of the Week Spotlight is brought to you by Farthest Reach, a space opera anthology written by Keystroke Mediums and edited by Lauren Moore. All right, very own Lauren Moore. She's amazing. The stars are distant. From the dawn of time, humanity has yearned for other skies. Keystroke Medium presents 11 different tales, stories that take you from alien landscapes to first contact and beyond, where mankind reached for the stars and never looked back. Welcome to Farthest Reach. Included in these stories, Lucky Bastard by Rick Partlow, Brace Cordova and the Winds of Sinjin 3 by C. Stephen Manley, Windham Rex by Kevin G. Summers, Superiority by J. Clifton Slater, Star Sleeper by Dean Floyd, Threat by Carrie G. Osborne, Synth by Luke T. Barnett, Frostbite by Julia V. and Ken Bebel, Echoes of Sonia by Ken Britz, Door Number 1 by Kalene Williams, For the Children by William S. Frisbee, Click by now. Doom.
There we go. Yay! Oh, and that kind of reminds me, we're going to do a little series in the rest of December. We're going to bring the authors in this anthology on, and do a little meet the author kind of thing during the day. It'll stream live to Facebook and stream live to YouTube, and we're going to do these around lunchtime. Some of the days in December, so just kind of keep tabs on our Facebook group, and they'll be coming up starting tomorrow on Friday the 13th.
It's going to be super cool, awesome, and fun.
All right, so we had a question from Walt. Walt asks, plot an entire series before the first book is sold, or just do enough to give your story room? And we kind of answered that, but I like this question from a pantsing perspective. Can I write a plot or start a plot that has room to expand? Do I have to know where the story is going, or can I just leave myself room to figure it out as I go along?
So I would say, because if you like to do discovery writing, and so if you sat down and plotted the whole thing out and all of a sudden you have nothing left to discover, you might not write. So if that's what is required to help you write, then do the bare minimum. Know where it is, at least that you're going, though. I would say you got to know what that end is so that you can at least try to keep things moving towards that direction. Because what normally happens, right, is someone starts an idea at the beginning, and then they get towards the second act, maybe even get into the second act, and then it's just like, I don't know where to go with it. But if you start with the end in mind, that at least will give you a direction on where it is you're trying to head and what it is your story is really about. If you give yourself a log line and know the ending and need to discover the rest, at least it'll give you something to go with.
And I'm going to interject really quickly because it was not Bill Frisbee who said the thing about the Looney Tunes. It was Sam Point. And I do remember doing that. And I'm sorry I mixed you up with Frisbee. I'm so sorry.
But on the other side of this, right, because I did have some other additional notes on this, and this is where I wanted to talk about a different book. So for instance, if you've ever read Samantha Shannon's Bone Season, it's an amazing book. But by the time we get to book 3, they had to send that book back to her 2 times and push the release date back because it was no longer fitting in with the rest of the story, because she had all these great ideas for book 1 and then kind of knew where she was going a little bit in book 2, but really rode herself into a corner by the time book 3 came along and had to change a ton of stuff in how things were working. So, and you can see the same happening with TV shows. They got an amazing first season. They get to that second season, they don't know where to go. Lost is a great example of it, becoming, much better show. Right. Like once they knew that they had an end date, that show became so much better. The second season just kind of meandered because they didn't know how long they were going to be on the air. So yeah, having that strong story Bible, like being like Kevin Page at Marvel Studios, knowing where you're going, you could direct, all of these other stories along the way, but because you know where it is you're trying to get.
Yeah, I think we can all think of a TV show that kind of meandered like that. And it was disappointing because the first season was so excellent and then the rest just kind of petered out.
Yeah, well, Stranger Things season 2 is by far the weakest. Like it kind of was like, well, do we do the exact same thing? I don't know what we're doing. Let's kind of go this direction. And then season 3, they brought it all back around. So it does take time to make sure you've got that. And so we see it even professionally, like Samantha Shannon, that's New York Times best-selling stuff. But she could not get that 3rd book to work as well as it could have had she started to do it that way from the beginning.
Okay. So speaking of Bill, he also asked, should you stay with specific characters throughout the series, or can you introduce new POVs?
So you need to do everything you can possibly do within the first half of book 1 to set up the rules of how you're telling the story. So, and that way, if you've got that switching point of view characters in your first book with that first half, the reader knows what's going to happen. When you deviate that in later books, that's where it bumps the readers out of that virtual reality you're creating. Think book 3 of Twilight. The point of view switches to Jacob, and lots of readers are pissed because they were promised Bella's first person point of view story, and they're partway through that and it's not there. Book 4 of Game of Thrones, it's the same way. Half of the characters aren't in that book, and they've been in the first 3 books. And it's not the good half characters. So, like you just have to establish those rules to say, hey, I can switch point of views, and I will introduce new characters.
So yeah, so then if that first book you have, let's just say roundabout number, you have 3 characters with different point of views. And then in book 2, you have a different 3 characters, but those 3 characters are still in the first book, but not necessarily the book through their eyes. But now the second book is.
Right. So, and I was also going to say that I was working this summer on a thriller romance type story that the series changes to different brothers being the lead character in each book. And so to help that transition, the end of each book, I had them switch it so that it switched the point of view at the end of each book to that new guy to start. That was the series, that was the end credit scene, using that example, to then hand off, like thinking of it as handing off the baton to the next person so that we know that that's where it's going.
I like that a lot. I haven't seen that in a book before, but if I was a reader, I think I'd really enjoy that because the first book story would be resolved. The story would be finished. I'd get my happily ever after, but then I'd be kind of hooked into the next book and excited already to see where it goes. Kind of reminds me of before ebooks, the old books that got published, they'd have that like teaser of the next book.
Yeah.
Coming in.
A couple chapters. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you like clip it out. You actually like clip out the coupon and like fill it out and mail it in to get a book. Yeah. But yeah, but this is like a new version, like a modern version. I like that.
Yeah, and with that point of view change, she also was doing swapping between the two main protagonist points of view through the book. So we knew that we could swap points of view, which I think, you know, in that situation is helpful, because there's not something weird. Although if you only were switching one point of view and it was just the last chapter after you did all your resolution, that would be pretty okay too, because you can get away with stuff on after the resolution. But if you're introducing it like in the middle of the second act, like you've already established so much, and then like if it's not paying off, it just is a cliffhanger that just doesn't feel right.
Now, part of his question was, is there a problem adding new characters with new POVs as the series progresses?
Again, as long as you've established that you can switch point of view, and because in book one, they're all new characters, okay? And so it will help if you hold on to some characters between books, but you know, as long as you've introduced them in a way and then you have established that we are switching points of view, that can be a really good thing. But remember that readers fall in love with characters. And if you redoing your whole cast in every book in your series, it can be dangerous, right? So like using the example I was just saying about the romance thriller ones, the two lead characters in book one are in book two, but they're just not point of view. So they'll still show up and still, you know, have that familiarity, and it's still carrying on this larger story arc about this family drama, but it then switching the point of view. So it's one of those things that you really have to balance and decide, is this worth switching all my characters to different characters for this next book, or will I lose too many of my audience to make this worthwhile?
So if the story can handle, I guess, that kind of scope, you know, if you need to have those different points of view to really get the full, you know, fruit of the gem of the story, then yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're setting that up within the first act, is that what you're saying?
Right, within the first half of the book, like that, those rules, and especially the first act, really should be establishing all the rules of how you're going to be telling this story.
First act, epically important as much as the first sentence.
Yep. It's a lot of firsts. And then again, like that specific example of the romance thriller, like that was what she was trying to do. So we had to develop a way that it would make sense to pass that from book to book and to really work. So since that was her objective, that was the problem that I had to solve. So if that's not your objective, if your objective isn't to have brand new characters in everyone, you're just trying to add one or two characters, that's fine. That happens all the time in books, you know, that switch point of views.
Now he has a more specific question about it. Is it
on fire?
Is it bad form to add a character and POV that have nothing to do directly with a current book but become crucial in another book? For instance, I have a battalion commander lose her battalion in book 3. She does not interact with the main plot or characters until book 5, but she does help reveal what is happening, setting the stage, and she is incidentally crucial to one of the main characters that appears in book 4.
So specifically with this, I would try to find a way to bring that character into the plot or subplot of that book. Specifically book 3 here that we're talking about. I would try to find a way to bring that in, especially if you're going to use their point of view. Another way to do this, though, would be that the character could also be introduced through one of the current point of view characters in a smaller scene, you know, that's helping to build up that character. Like, for instance, you know, this battalion commander let's say you have a captain who's in a meeting with that battalion commander and they're having a conversation about something that helps your captain become more important to the reader, but then is also introducing the battalion commander for down the road. You know, if you can't do either of those and that doesn't work, you can always use the old, here's on the news. Here's on the news, the battalion commander is giving some report on the news or whatever like that, you know, that introduces it and the characters are talking about the character. But having a character, again, just like we were talking earlier, does this scene help the story? You know, like, and if it's not helping the story, then the reader's going to be like, why is it here?
So ultimately, if it's if it's just that one scene, I'm talking specifically his, if it can be used, like you're suggesting, in another means to strengthen your actual point of view characters that are throughout the whole book, might make that introduction stronger.
Right. And then, because if they're, again, it depends on how you're telling your story. So if you tell your story, let's say from omniscient third, and you're jumping around all the time to different characters who are only in maybe one scene or two scene, you might be able to get away with it as long as that it deals with the plot or subplot. You've got to find a way to tie it into the plot or subplot, or why is it there?
Of the current book.
Of the current book. So,
Right.
How can you tie that character, that battalion commander, into book 3's plot or subplot?
Right.
If you're going to have especially if you're going to have their point of view, that's essential. Because other than that, they're like, why is this here? What's this doing here? Because then they're going to start looking for that in the rest of the story.
Right.
It's a really good point.
Yeah, you don't want to just show the audience a character and then not have them a part of the plot at all.
Right.
You're going to confuse your audience and maybe lose them.
Yeah, and you don't want to do that. But I understand, the need to set them up for the next book. So again, how is there a point of view character in book 3 that you're already using that can interact with that battalion commander in a way, in that plot or subplot that helps the current character's point of views?
Maybe that's a way to expand your plot. Like, you might find a twist in your plot that you hadn't anticipated before. When you start asking yourself, well, so who is this character? So why are they important? What's their motivation? How do they fit into this larger narrative? You might find that your plot's expanding by trying to wrap them in. But again, don't just thrust them into your story somewhere. Like, find a way where they fit in. Find what they're kind of fitting into that larger plot.
Right, because if this, and I don't have any additional backstory here, but let's say this battalion commander, it's losing their battalion in book 3. So is there a family member in this battalion, that's part of one of the point of views family? So that becomes a crucial connection between those characters, and they're trying to find out what's going on with this battalion commander. Like, just look for ways that you can connect it, and don't be afraid to brainstorm something or switch point of view to a different character that helps connect it more with the current plot or subplot.
Yeah.
I will say, to ease some potential authors' fears of doing just that thing, I spent 3 months on a specific scene in a specific book, and because I had to come up with new characters to make it all work, even though I was anyway. After that 3 months, I ended up tossing it out and put everything that I was writing in that scene into him being really pissed off, coming furiously into the room, and it did it in 2 paragraphs that I was trying to work 3 months for a whole freaking chapter. So that was like 5,000 to 8,000 words I threw away. But it made it stronger, and it actually helped to make another connection that I didn't realize was there even better for later. So do not hesitate to do so. It could be good.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Luke T. Barnett has a question. He asks, what's a good method for creating a series Bible to keep all your facts straight?
Oh, so, there's a lot of things that are out there. Lisa Marie Caparelli has a site called buildingdystopia.com, where she's done some interviews with world building experts that could give you some help. I've used, it was designed for role-playing games, and for designing and putting together role-playing games. It's called World Anvil. That's a good one that allows you to go through and just build stuff out, adding in characters and locations and all these types of things. You could use wikis if you want to be, keep it online. I know Story Shop's probably still out there. Scrivener, of course, pen and paper. Again, you've got to figure out a way to keep the consistency, because especially if you're doing a really complicated series, if you're doing a really complicated series, you've got to have a way to be able to pull these characters and, you got multiple points of view. Where was this character? Design timelines. Timelines can be really helpful. Where is everybody in the timeline? Even if all you have is like Excel or, Google's version of Excel that you could put in the scene. You could have a list of every character's name, and then where are they at this particular time and place.
Yeah, as an editor, I'll read a book and I'll keep track of all the characters. I'll keep track of all the locations. I'll keep track of the weapons, the new words, and all that. But when I try to do that as a writer, it really did not work. I could not keep track of all that stuff. But I did find that once I got my draft out and then I was in the revising stage and I was reading it, stepping back from the story and reading it as a reader, then I could develop the headspace to keep track of all that stuff. So it could be that if you're wanting to keep a series viable, maybe you could save that for the editing stage and then keep track of it later. Maybe that would help.
And again, going way back to where we started from, those basic outlines for each of those books can be the start of a good Bible, because you've used the generic terms like protagonist and that, and then you're just starting to add them back in. Here's my confidant for my character, and then you start adding who is that confidant and all the information for them. And so, but again, you got to find a method that's just going to work for you. That's going to be affordable, because I know some of those programs cost per month, right? Yeah, and just find the one that's going to help, because I don't think that there's an end all in any one of those that I've used that I've been like, okay, this is the thing that's going to be it forever. They all have pluses, they all have minuses. You've got to figure out exactly what it is that you need based on how complicated your series is.
Now, Kalene, what do you and Bill use for your series?
For the world building, or just as we're writing?
Yeah, either.
So we've actually gone through a couple of different things. Initially, because he works specifically in Scrivener, and I don't. I work in Word. So he is a freaking techno guru genius, Mr. Techno Grunt, as it were. Created a folder that we could share, and then it's synced up to his Scrivener, so I could open each file in my Word document and then work on them. But he's like, no, you should totally get Scrivener. So being the techno grunt he is, we now have our two Scriveners synced through a file, and it's just craziness. So that's what we do. But we also got your Word document for keeping all that information together, the characters, the different weapons, the planets, and things like that, where we can at least have it all in one whole document. Mm-hmm. And me personally, being the way that I am, I got a special notebook that I have all my pretty pen colors, and I am handwriting everything in, and because that's what I do.
Any other suggestions or resources on keeping?
Fictionary.co is another one, although specifically is designed to help you break down visually your novel. That you can load your novel in there and it'll show you who's in what scene and where your plot structures are and things. Although it's specifically for that, you could absolutely use it to then move forward with an entire series.
So also, I want to add to what I was saying, which is, that was good what you were saying, Mr. Manface. Draw.io. We had very, very super duper initially started using that. And I went absolutely apeshit crazy with it because it did all the little online things that I needed to do. It's a little iffy when you're trying to type multiple things, like lists, like you have, and if you click out of it, you have to read. Anyway, one of its minuses. But that one was really cool. We had started, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 was each of its own page, and then we did all the little squares and I color coded it and all this great stuff. But I mean, that was something that we were using. It looks like grid paper, except digital.
And one other thought here, you don't have to build a world Bible before you start writing.
Yeah.
I would recommend not doing that because
it's going to take you down too many rabbit holes.
I tried to do that once a number of years ago, and it took me 16 years to write book 1 because I was sucked down freaking world building hole, and I could never get myself out to discover the characters and what
Right.
they were doing in this world. And then by the time I actually did that, 90% of everything I spent, focusing on had no point.
Ended up not using, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, when you said the word hours, I think we all thought the same thing. Like, yeah, the most important thing about writing is writing.
It is. And like at the end of the day, yeah, if you're not writing, then what, you're just doing some make-believe stuff, which is fun. It's fun to make up worlds and things like that. But if your goal is to write a series, spend the time writing the series. That's why everything you see me do, like I'm trying to keep everything as simple as possible. I'm not trying to throw some complex thing. You got to do all these things before you start writing. Just knock out the 3-act. Like if you know what you're going, then go for it.
Are you secretly Frisbee's twin brother? You could be. You totally could be.
I think we're all thinking Clark's our spirit animal. Yeah.
Clark should be everybody's spirit animal. He's amazing.
Thanks.
Golf clap.
All right. John Evans asks, any tips on plotting for collaborative projects?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing you do is you get it in writing. Contracts keep honest people honest. Dishonest people are always going to break contracts anyway. But starting up front, at least you know where your division of labor and whose intellectual property belongs to and what you're supposed to be doing. Because let's say you're brought into someone else's world and you're creating new characters for that world. Whose are they? Are they yours or are they theirs? How much are you supposed to be writing? So knowing those kinds of things up front before you even start is really good. If you're already in a collaboration project and you're like, oh God, I don't want to even do this because it makes me feel awkward to talk about this now, talk about it now, because there could come that time where your partner is no longer able to write. And then all this stuff you've gotten done, gets held up in, not knowing where to take it, and who it belongs to. Also, you have to have a willingness to compromise for the good of the story. That it will never, when you're starting to do collaborations, it'll never be yours. It'll never be theirs. It's together, a different thing entirely. And you've got to be willing to do that. So finding that right partner and that you can work well with, that is really key. Like, are you, how do you work? What's important for your communication? How often do you need to meet? And if the other person isn't doing that, then you might also develop additional problems. So this is, it's more important than, trying to find the right person to marry, because you're going to be connected to this book forever. And you just really want to be able to make sure that you've got this done right.
Yeah, I will add to that. That was definitely one of the things Frisbee and I talked about a lot, even before we started plotting anything out, was how, we operate in our own stories. Because I had edited for him, so I knew what, his end stuff looked like, but how did he get there? So in our collaborative, we work off of both of our strengths. So what he does in the story, is the thing that he loves and does the most easiest. And the thing that I do is the thing that I love the most and do the easiest. And then everything in between is what we discuss and do together. Yeah. But we outline together, that sort of thing. So because I'm really getting into writers' rooms, like the idea of being able to work together with a group that's, this person's amazing at dialogue, this person's amazing at doing this. Like, everyone's got this strength that they can come through and help with the story. But the real problem with any of those is checking that ego at the door. And that's some of the things, creatives, we all love our stories, right? And so the moment that someone else disagrees with the direction of the story, even though it could make the story better, like that, and you can't check that ego, and you have that problem. So that's one of the big things, you really want to make sure you can work with somebody and be okay with them contributing and maybe even changing stuff how you saw it originally. Yeah.
Or maybe it's a matter of, depending on how you set up the relationship in the first place.
Yeah. Well, yes, because you could just hire a writer's room and be like, we're doing it my way, and this is how I want you to do it. And as long as everybody knows that up front, that works. But I think most of us probably will approach our first collaborative project more in a friendship right? Like we're finding someone who, we met at a conference or something like that. Hey, I got this great idea. You got this great idea. And we just making it very casual, like just putting a few things in emails back and forth and starting it that way. But yeah, like if you're in that point where you can hire everybody, that's awesome. And, and just do your thing. And that's what everyone's going to do. But I think most of us probably are going to have that other, and we've got to be willing to check that ego and know that this is a different thing. It's going to be something different than what we originally thought, and it's going to be better because of the stuff we put in, both of us.
Yeah, you definitely at the gate need to be open with what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. Be, open with that, and check the ego and be open to all the ideas.
A couple times I was stuck in my collaboration with Richard. He told me, follow your instinct, follow your gut. He didn't say what I was anticipating. I thought he'd say, no, like, don't do that. We don't want to have an Ascension AI character. Don't you know what that will do to our world and plot?
But he's so amazing.
Instead, Richard said, follow your gut. Can't wait to read it. And that just, kind of opened up my creative world, and I went for it, and that helped me to get the book written. So maybe that'll help you with your creative process too. Sometimes you got to take a risk and let your partner just kind of be free.
Yeah.
And express confidence in them and see what happens from that.
And just go with it. And again, right. You're not, if you're trying to use a process and it's not helping you write, then it's the wrong process.
Right.
So
yes. And we had another question from the live chat. Silent Wolf asks, what about suggestions for open plot hooks or threads? I.e., if you just write to the outline, it's going to be pretty straightforward. But if you can sprinkle plot threads, you are better off, right?
Well, yeah, like anything, it's going to make the story more significant. And I think that's one of the best things about plotting everything up front, because then you can start to story weave. When I went and broke down the first Harry Potter book, I was just amazed by all the little things that led up to some other little thing, which led to another little thread, that put it all together. And it's running a really good like you got to think in that subplot, plot. And this one moves to that one, and this one helps adjust that one. Like these are the things that are moving everything forward, and how do I get the character here? So yes, absolutely. Start with the basics and then start adding in all this other really good stuff. That whole thing that I was talking about, what kind of fun stuff do you want to see in this, right? Like that's a really fun way to do this to help develop scenes that can, take your subplots in a different direction than you might not have thought before.
But if you don't have a foundation, it's really, 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 really hard to do that story weaving. And I love that term. Now you can story weave like a wizard.
All right. Thomas Hoddle asks, why does a scene look so good when you plot it and go horribly awry when you write it? Why?
Well, I wish he hadn't put his name on there. I just insult him. But I'm just kidding. So, yeah. So I mean, but that's again, like that's some of the problems, when we get into writing it. And that's what I was saying. I think that you write the whole series out and then make those changes, because that scene that looked so good when you started writing it, the character took it a different direction. I think that's probably what you mean by horribly awry, or it just means that you didn't understand what you were really trying to do with that scene to begin with, which is, again, going back to what we call a log line, person, the place, the problem, the payoff. That should be your guiding compass for every single scene. If those things aren't happening, maybe it's because you're trying to drag the scene out too long. It could be that you have the wrong characters in it. Try adjusting the characters. Like if you have multiple point of views, put it in someone else's point of view. How does that change it? How does that make that more meaningful? And just, you've got to keep working, keep practicing on the writing. If it's just an issue of needing more time writing, I would always suggest fan fiction. It's such a weird idea that us as writers don't practice other people's work. Like painters paint the masters, pianists play the great concertos, like all this type of stuff. But we never write in other people's worlds just to practice. And they've already got the characters there, they've got plots there, they've got everything set up, and you can practice until your heart's content, trying to figure out how to move things forward. At least that's my thought.
It's a good thought. Also, yeah, I mean, take the pressure off of trying to get all of these things all at once at the same time right now, because I need all the books to get them all out. Give yourself the time to grow, the time to immerse and understand what it is that you're writing. And for a lot of you out there, it's like, well, I do this very easy. That is a freaking strength for you, and I'm jealous. But we can always strengthen our weaknesses. Give your time to do so.
Right, because this is an art, which means is the more you practice it, the better you get at it. Like that's just what this is. You're going to continually learn new stuff, and you're going to look back at your work from years ago, and you're like, why did I ever think that I could write back then? Because I know so much more now. And that's just what it's going to be. It's a continual learning process, and you just keep adding one step at a time to become great.
Yeah, and I like, Kalene, what you said about taking the pressure off of ourselves. For me, when my writing can be so slow because I'm trying to make that scene absolutely perfect before I move on, and that really slows down my process. My brain becomes like molasses. Whereas if I can just kind of let all of that go, let all of my editing go, and just let the words out, and not worry about whether or not it's going horribly awry, just kind of get the scene out, I can move forward. So, go easy on yourself.
Yep.
Just try, keep on moving forward in your scene. You can always edit later, but we can't edit at a blank page.
Right. Shitty first draft.
Right.
So, I guess.
There's a reason I call it vomit. You gotta do the dirty work, find the gems. Because you swallowed some gems and they just came up.
On that note, I think we're out of questions. We got through them all.
One.
We did.
Oh, yay and it's only 8:01. We did it, guys.
Nice.
2 minutes over.
Every show that we can get through every single question.
Wait, Silent Wolf added question. Come on, man. No, I'm just kidding.
Extra question.
Love these questions. Would the novel series techniques you talk about still be good for, say, a short story series? I know the skills of writing a short story are different than a novel. That's a really good question.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure that they would. I'm really not sure that it would, because the short story structure is slightly different, because it's usually you're taking place in a scene and not necessarily placing in all of the same structures that you have in a full-length novel. But you could test it out. You could try it and report back and see what you find. Gregory Norris is, I think, one of the best short story writers that's out there. He makes his living just writing short stories. Look up Gregory Norris. He's been in a few different interviews. He's got a great blog, and he's got some great places and resources to do short stories.
Alrighty. Well, there you go. There you have it. Clark, you have been amazing.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Can you remind our viewers, listeners, I will do the thing after I do this thing, because I already started this first thing, where they get, yes, that's that thing, where they can find you, internet stalk you, and hopefully not be creepy.
Well, if you just put in Clark Chamberlain in Google, I'm the top results, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. We all want that.
Yep. But you can also find me on the bookeditorshow.com, and that's a really good place. And there's not as many resources up there at the moment. We've been doing redesign, but you can find me all over there. And Clark Chamberlain.
All right, you heard it here. You heard it almost first. All right, so subjectively and totally randomly, we are going to give away a sticker to one of our very lucky live viewers. And tonight, in row number 344, we have Bill Frisbee. Please submit your information to Lauren Moore after the show to receive your sticker. I say again, please submit your information to Lauren Moore after the show to receive your sticker. And with that, thank you so much, everybody, for your time, for your ears, for your eyeballs, for those listening live. Be sure to check us back next week. We're going to talk about reading, writing, and everything in between. Click all the buttons so that you know that we're here. I'm doing everything backwards. I need to plot myself better. Have a good night!